Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special live stream of Breakthrough News. I am your host, Zoe Alexandra. My co-host, Rania Khalek, is hoping to join us later on, but she is currently in Beirut, Lebanon, which is facing heavy bombardment by Israel. She is currently working to relocate to a safe location. And later on in the show, we will be unpacking Israel's latest escalation against Lebanon and how it relates to last night's ceasefire agreement between the U.S. and Iran. But before we go into that, I want to remind our lovely viewers that you can help support Breakthrough News. Make sure to like and share this episode, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and make sure that those notifications are activated. Click the bell. You can also materially support Breakthrough News by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News and becoming a member for as little as $5 a month. You can get exclusive content there, access to all of our full episodes, especially Rania Khalek's dispatches. And most importantly, you'll be helping an independent media outlet that is currently fighting the tsunami of nonstop corporate disinformation that we are being bombarded with every single day. And with that, we'll get right into the news. It has been a tumultuous past 24 hours. Last night, about 90 minutes before the deadline that was set by President Donald Trump himself, threatening that an entire civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. Trump himself, again, made an announcement saying that the U.S. would suspend bombing and attacks against Iran and that it had reached a 2-week ceasefire agreement on the basis of the 10-point plan put forth by Iran in these last weeks. A lot has happened since that announcement. We have already seen massive ceasefire violations, especially against Lebanon by Israel. Reportedly, according to Israel itself, that 100 airstrikes were carried out in the span of 10 minutes against densely populated civilian areas. And estimates are varying in terms of the death toll, but we know that at least 89 people were killed and hundreds more injured. And there's reports that Israel has once again began bombing as we speak. And again, we'll be getting to that later on in the show, and hopefully we will be joined by Rania Khalek, assuming that she is in a safe location. And of course, all of these attacks have raised speculations about how this will impact this recently agreed to agreement between the U.S. and Iran. How will this ceasefire be impacted? How is the world going to respond? To address all of these questions and more, we have a very good lineup with us today. First, we're going to be joined by Jamal Abdi, who is the president of the National Iranian American Council, and he's going to be here with us to break down this agreement and what it means for U.S.-Iranian relations. So I'm very happy to welcome our first guest, Jamal, to the show. Thanks so much for being with us.
Of course, my pleasure.
Great. Well, let's get right into it. So yesterday, the whole world was on edge, waiting for this 8 p.m. Eastern deadline that Trump had essentially imposed, again, not only on the Iranian people, but the entire world. And people were hoping and waiting that he would walk back from a threat which many interpreted to be nuclear and, of course, genocidal. How do you interpret this ceasefire announcement, and what do you think are the major points we should take away from it?
So I am trying to interpret the agreement, and I think, unfortunately, everybody who signed on to it is trying to interpret what it meant. So today, the White House is now saying it does not include Lebanon. Israel is, as you laid out, bombing massively, and that seems to fly in the face of what we heard yesterday, which is that this is all-encompassing. This is a region-wide halt on this war. There were attacks on Iran from the UAE. There have been Iranian responses in attacks on UAE and I think others. And so already within just the first few hours, it's really unclear what has actually been agreed to. Then we don't even get into the terms of the negotiations that are supposed to take place over the next 2 weeks. So apparently we have on one side JD Vance, who I don't know what his experience is in negotiating complicated, ceasefire agreements or nuclear negotiated agreements. So some, I think of anybody in the administration, he's probably the most kind of anti-war restrainer. So that is hopefully a positive thing. But beyond that, we were, when Witkoff was appointed the negotiator, I thought, okay, great. This is somebody who is sort of not beholden to the status quo of Washington, maybe, not going to adopt all the shibboleths of what you're allowed to say and what you're not allowed to say, and everything has been built up about Iran. And he came in and, total failure. I mean, 2 rounds of negotiations that ended in surprise attacks on Iran. So now we have a new negotiator in JD Vance. He is supposedly going to be negotiating with Araghchi, the foreign minister, and then Ghalibaf, who is the Speaker of Parliament and the person who I think Donald Trump thinks he's the president. He's not the president, but Trump refers to him as the president. So they're going to be in the talks. And there are 2 versions of what the basis for the talks are going to be. There's the U.S. 15-point plan, and then there's the Iranian 10-point plan. And both of these are fairly maximalist proposals. And the problem that we have is that Donald Trump yesterday said that the 10-point plan was workable and would be the basis for the negotiations. I thought that was surprising given the positions Trump has taken, in which he has completely adopted over time the Netanyahu position on the nuclear issue, on the demands for constraints on Iran's conventional military capabilities. So the 15-point proposal was just a total fantasy. I mean, the U.S., I don't know if I need to break any hearts here, but the U.S. lost this war. And now going into negotiations where we actually take a tougher stand than we had before, or think we're going to get more out of it, I think is a losing proposition. The Iranian 10-point proposal, it has elements that I think are requirements for any agreement, such as that this is actually a permanent ceasefire, that Iran is not going to get bombed again in 6 months as they were last June and then this year. So I think that is just the basic framework, that this has to be permanent and not just a way to pause so that the U.S. and Israel come back in and mow the lawn and Iran is just repeatedly bombed and a permanent war-torn, basket case of a country that Netanyahu prefers. Other elements, though, when it gets into like the nuclear issue, I mean, Iran is dead set on what it perceives as its right to enrichment as a participant in the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Trump today is saying that Iran is going to stop all of enrichment. This was the issue that they could not get past in these previous 2 rounds of negotiations. So what is it? Has Trump decided to take a more realistic position and acknowledge an Iranian right to enrichment under constraints and limitations? Okay, well, God forbid, that sounds like the Obama deal. Or have the Iranians, after essentially standing up to the 2 of the most powerful militaries in the world, being in a position because of their control over the Strait of Hormuz to essentially decide when the war ended or not, the notion that they are now going to cave on this central question, I think, is farcical. So there's a lot of work to be done in these next 2 weeks, and on day 1, a lot of it seems to be coming apart. So I am concerned by the lack of stability here, but I am given confidence by one fact, and I think that is that the belief that there's a military solution and that the U.S. can dictate terms to Iran and has this trump card of military action in reserve has been dispensed with. We now can live in a reality-based world where negotiation involves compromise. And so hopefully Donald Trump's desire to avoid having the Strait of Hormuz closed, desire to put this war behind him, will hopefully put the negotiations in a position where they need to succeed. They're too big to fail, and the necessary, whether they're concessions or whatever it needs to be to keep this intact. Hopefully, the United States understands how important that is, and that Trump will actually tell Netanyahu to cut it out and try to keep this thing cobbled together so that we don't just get a return of what we had 24 hours ago.
Right. And I think, the insistence of Iran in securing what is the permanent ceasefire and not the possibility for the US and Israel to kind of launch attacks at will, of course, like they did in June and like they did now in March, has been the fundamental demand. And it's interesting because in the same message that Donald Trump posted on Truth Social, talking about the fact that they are not going to allow uranium enrichment, he also says that there was regime change that has gone through, which I think many people would agree is not true, given that mostly the entire structure of the Iranian state is intact. But, I wanted to get to a different question, which is that Trump and Netanyahu's war on Iran was illegal on many levels, on the level of international law, but even on the level of U.S. law. Again, going to war against a foreign country needs certain approvals. Those seem to be not taken. There's been, a lot of discontent expressed by people across the world in the inaction of U.S. Congress to actually hold Trump accountable and, again, force him to actually abide by U.S. law itself. Now that this ceasefire agreement, as tenuous as it is, as fragile as it is, has been reached, what can U.S. lawmakers do to hold Trump accountable and to actually make sure that this ceasefire is enforced?
That's a really important question. It seems like, Trump has the ability to launch or send an armada into the Middle East, launch negotiations, threaten a genocide, engage in a war in which civilians were clearly targeted, and then broker a 2-week ceasefire on very unclear terms, all while Congress still hasn't even gotten its pants on. Like, Congress has not done anything. Now, part of that is the fact that, Republicans are in the majority, and so they control the floor. So in the Senate, the Senate has forced several votes on trying to end the war. And and every Democrat voted to end the war except for Fetterman. Every Republican voted to continue the war except for Rand Paul. So really, if there was a different partisan breakdown, that would have passed. Now, does raise the question, would Chuck Schumer have allowed for a vote to actually pass? Or is this kind of strategic? He knew it wasn't going to pass, so he allows Democrats to vote on this to be able to claim they're against the war without having to actually, God forbid, take leadership and actually drive policy. In the House, sort of a similar situation. We have had one vote to end the war, and 2 Republicans did vote to end the war. I think 4 Democrats voted to continue it. When that balance seemed to have changed, and it appeared that there were both enough Democrats that were now against the war and potentially several Republicans who were going to vote to end the war, Hakeem Jeffries decided to not call that vote, and instead they left town for recess. And then yesterday he put out a righteously indignant tweet about how Congress should return to Washington and vote. And so again, it's just leadership is playing, I think, these games where they're trying to protect some of their lawmakers who are more dependent on the Israel lobby and the war lobby, and want to be able to, on one hand, say we're against this, but on the other hand, not actually take action to make that come true and to actually end it. Hakeem Jeffries famously said at the beginning of Trump's term, we don't have the leverage. I don't know why everybody's so mad at me. We don't have any cards. Well, now you did have the cards. You did have leverage, and you decided to not use it. As far as what Congress can do now, I know there's a lot of things being discussed, and we'll see where they go. I mean, there's talk of everything from impeaching Hegseth or impeaching Trump to we've called for an investigation into potential war crimes. There's still potentially, a vote to formally say there's no authorization for war. I think that, I don't know, I'm expecting pushback now on that, because I think that there may be this position that, well, now there's this ceasefire, we need to let the negotiations happen, and we can't weaken the president's hand. So we'll see where that goes. To me, there needs to be fundamental reform. Like, this is another wake-up call. This happened under Trump's first term as well, where he was, doing Muslim bans and killing foreign leaders. And instead of actually, once Democrats took power, and Republicans too, saying, okay, now we've learned the hard way that our government is partially law, partially just gentleman's agreement, and we need to actually put some guardrails in place. Okay, this is a wake-up call. It is too damn easy for a president to start a war. And if you read the accounts, he had no idea what was going on. He's being misled by Netanyahu. He doesn't understand what his military advisors are telling him. Nobody in the room around him is willing to push back on any of these arguments. And so we get these dumb decisions. This is why we have a Congress. This is why that they're supposed to be involved in these decisions. Not that there's some great geniuses in Congress, but hopefully through a more robust vetting, the American people and sentiments and views get to play a role in this thing. So anyway, I think there needs to be like a wholesale reinterpretation of how wars are actually started, and Congress needs to claw back some power so that this never happens again. And so for activists, I think that ultimately needs to be our goal here, is to make sure this never happens again, and push lawmakers, especially if there's, a change in November, push them to actually put in place some real guardrails against more of these stupid wars that it turns out a president can just decide to launch on a whim. That just cannot happen again.
Right. And I mean, it's interesting to point out that this war was actually highly unpopular amongst the American people. There was, very high levels of disapproval and, very little support for the U.S. military action in Iran. So to say that Congress should and could have acted more, I think, is an understatement, given the fact that, again, polls showed across the board that the American people were not in favor of this. And, just a final question before we let you go. For people who want to know more about NIAC and the efforts and initiatives it's undertaking, where can they go to find out?
Our website or our handle on, all the social platforms, it's NIA Council for National Iranian American Council. So NIA Council. Go to our website. We've got like a poll of the Iranian American community that shows that no, we were not calling for this war. We did not want Trump to nuke Iran. All of the information is up on our website and on Twitter and Instagram.
Well, we thank you so much for the vital work that you're doing there. And make sure to follow along. And we'll definitely be getting in touch in the coming weeks. As you said, this is a story that will be developing, especially over the next 2 weeks. But of course, I think we can expect further updates as the year goes on. So thank you for joining us here at the live stream.
Thank you. Take care.
Great. Well, we'll be moving now to our next guest. Hopefully soon we will be joined by Rania, who, again, was unable to join at the top of the stream because Israel is continuing to bombard Beirut, Lebanon's capital, in the wake of the ceasefire agreement between the U.S. and Iran. But now we are very lucky to be joined by a good friend of the show, Dr. Vijay Prashad, the executive director. Executive director of the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. Vijay, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolute pleasure to be with you.
Well, Rania is joining imminently, so I know she'll have a lot to say on Lebanon, but I did want to start off by asking you, a lot has happened in the last 16 hours since Trump announced this ceasefire agreement between the U.S. and Iran. Again, Israel has launched massive attacks against Lebanon, especially in Beirut, not only confined to the southern suburb Dahieh, but really in sites across the city. And this is despite the fact that both Iran and even Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif stated explicitly that the ceasefire agreement did include attacks against Lebanon. So what do you make of this escalation, and how do you think both Iran and the guarantors of this agreement will respond?
Yeah, I think firstly, it's really important for people to understand that as this ceasefire comes in for 2 weeks, it's not the end of the war. It's a pause. We don't know what's going to happen 2 weeks from now. It's important also to recognize that the Iranians have made public their 10-point proposal. United States apparently has a 15-point proposal, but it's not been put to the public at all. The 10-point proposal the Iranians have, if you look at it closely, it's pretty reasonable. I mean, they say, for instance, they would like the aggression to stop, and they don't mean the aggression to stop that started, a month ago. They mean the aggression against Iran that began in 1951 when President Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized Iran's oil. At the time, United States launched Operation Ajax to remove that government. And since 1951, when Mossadegh announced the nationalization, the United States, Britain, and other powers have tried to squeeze and destroy Iran. So it's perfectly reasonable to ask for a non-aggression, a general non-aggression undertaking. They're asking for things like reparations for war damage. Well, why not? This was an illegal war that the United States conducted, a war of aggression against Iran. Why not ask for reparations and so on? Why not ask for the removal of US military bases in the Gulf Arab states? By the way, Saudi Arabia already removed US military bases in 1991. They had an enormous base. Why should there be a base in Qatar or in the Emirates? What is the point? They are not defending those countries. That is now very clear. Why shouldn't Iran and Oman charge fees at the Strait of Hormuz? After all, you have to go through their waters. There is no international waters in that strait. I mean, their 10-point proposal is reasonable enough for a conversation. And I think in this 2-week period, it's very important for people to look at these 10 points, to study them, and to try to understand against the idea that these are utopian proposals, to try to study them and see what kind of world of peace can be constructed. Don't forget, and this is the last point, that the Iranians have also said they're not just talking about a ceasefire against Iran. They're talking about a ceasefire across West Asia. That means a ceasefire in Lebanon immediately. Israel has invaded illegally Lebanon since Operation Litani in 1978. These are all illegal invasions. Nobody's condemning them. And the genocide against the Palestinians has to end. But these are general statements of principle that should be taken seriously. They are not going to be there in the 15 points that Trump will perhaps one day make public, but they're certainly there in the 10 points. And I think in this 2-week period, it behooves people outside the region to study these 10 points and to put pressure on our own governments to take them and institutionalize them.
Yes, I definitely point well taken. And, taking a step back, what do the events of the last 24 hours and specifically the fact that the U.S. essentially caved, and in many respects, people are calling this as a victory for Iran. I mean, Vijay, you authored or co-authored, helped write the Tricon study, Hyperimperialism, which discusses the U.S. and its, military complex. It's investing over $1 trillion a year in war. Its massive network across the world. Yet, in this war, it seems that Iran was able to kind of bring not only the United States, but its most well-armed junior partner, Israel, to its knees. So what does this mean for Iran, for the resistance, and really the global South?
Well, the first thing I would say to any country that's trying to establish a sovereign project is make sure your children study science and technology. So that you can build a independent indigenous capacity to come up with things like the indigenously made missiles and whatever weapon system, but also the other parts of what makes Iran such a remarkable place, which is that they have basically their own industrialization. It's not a deindustrialized country. It's a country whose finance policy can be criticized at times, but they have industrialized the country quite significantly. That's very interesting. It is true that Iran has effected a strategic victory against the United States. There's no doubt that the US military capacity is incredible. United States has pummeled Iran. It's destroyed infrastructure. It's destroyed research facilities for healthcare, bombed the Pasteur Institute, destroyed bridges. I mean, I stand by the idea that the United States has the capacity to destroy bridges, doesn't know how to build them. It's very good at destruction, and it did that to Iran. So it's not like Iran was able to defend itself from the American US onslaught or the Iranian onslaught. It's just that Iran strategically knew exactly what to do cleverly to bring the United States to the point where the US leader was begging for a ceasefire. I mean, what the Iranians did was they firstly attacked all the soft targets in the Gulf Arab states. They took out radar facilities that the US had within range. You see, they can't hit the United States. Their best rockets have a range of 2,000 kilometers. They may have rockets to 4,000 kilometers, but they didn't really show them. The 2,000-kilometer rockets could take out US radar systems in Kuwait, in other Gulf Arab states, and so on. That's what they did. And then they restricted transit through the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, that was an inevitable action. They used that so strategically, so cleverly. They have about 2,000 small boats that they didn't wield yet. Okay, they didn't bring those out yet. They're still sitting in the underground tunnels. They didn't blow the whistle yet to get the militia, the pro-Iranian militia groups in Iraq to act against US military targets there. They didn't do it yet. They could have. The important thing is they didn't even ask Ansar Allah in Yemen to strike US targets on their behalf. I mean, it's very interesting that they had an enormous escalation ladder which they could still have climbed. Their escalation hasn't ended. But Zoe, it's important to remember that they were fighting a kind of modern guerrilla war against the United States. It's not the case that Iran, was able to bring down all the US aircraft or bring down all the US missiles or whatever it is. They won on two fronts. They won on the front, firstly, of the population. The Iranian population did not crack. It continued to feel that this war was out of the question. They would die rather than surrender. That was one. Whereas in the United States, the population was, why are we at war with Iran? It's crazy. Gas prices are going to go up. I mean, there was no support for the war. So they won on the front of popular support for the defense of Iran. And secondly, they won because they extremely cleverly used the vulnerabilities of the United States. As I said, US bases in the Gulf Arab states and the Strait of Hormuz. Very, very clever strategic utilization of whatever military capacity Iran has. It has considerable capacity, but let's not exaggerate its capacity. It's considerable. And they used it so cleverly to pin the United States down.
Well, Vijay, I'm very excited that we can be joined in this conversation right now by Rania, Khalek, who was able to leave Beirut and is in a safe location. Rania, we're very happy you're with us.
I'm very happy to be with you too, you guys. Today was absolutely horrendously terrifying. And the Israelis are just they're demolishing buildings that are not far from where you used to live in Beirut, Vijay. I just don't know how else to express it. Just wanton destruction, utterly terrifying, massacres of buildings and areas of Beirut they hadn't hit before, with zero warnings to people. I actually have never been as scared as I was today. And so is everybody around me. Today was very much a Gaza-like situation taking place. Just before, I left one area of Beirut, like 15 minutes later, they took down an entire building. Vijay, you probably know Abbe Verdun. They took down a building right near it. These are, areas of Beirut that are typically not touched by war like this. And again, full of people, full of residents. The Israelis saying they're going after Hezbollah, that they're going after military fighters. There's no fighting happening in Beirut. There's no fighters in Beirut. The fighters are all in the south, where the Israelis are struggling to invade the country. So they were just carrying out wanton destruction today. I just want to give some numbers while I'm at it to explain to you just how severe this was. The Israelis used 50 planes to drop 160 bombs in 100 locations across Lebanon in 10 minutes today. And then they bragged about it. There's so far 89 dead and over 800 injured. I'm certain that number is going to rise. For hours, all I heard was ambulances. For hours and hours, just ambulance after ambulance. The hospitals are completely overwhelmed. There's so many locations that were hit today across the city. Civil defense did not have time to get to one place or the next. I mean, there's people still under the rubble. I mean, it was the kind of day where, just like from a personal perspective, I spent the day looking around the walls that were around me and hoping to God that they weren't going to become a weapon against me. Because all you can do in that situation is shelter in place and hope to God the Israelis don't hit your building or don't hit the building next to you or the building across the street from you. Beirut is so incredibly densely populated. And I know this sounds probably familiar because we heard people in Gaza say it. And we've heard people in parts of Lebanon say it, in the southern suburbs of Beirut say it. And it's not that one part of Lebanon is more important than another part. It's just that this is literally nowhere is safe. There's no, they hit a building that was housing displaced people today, full of women and children. They literally hit it, like they took down a nut factory. Or there's a famous brand of nuts called Rafai. They took down the warehouse where workers were working to roast the nuts. Like, this is just wanton destruction and punishment of the Lebanese. I don't really understand why. I mean, I know the Israelis do this, but they seem to be incredibly angry about the ceasefire with Iran. They're taking it out on Lebanon. There's no military benefit to doing what they did today other than just, I think, carrying out domestic bloodlust, literally, to satisfy an angry population that doesn't want the war on Iran to be over. And it stands to be seen what Iran will do here. Iran repeatedly said throughout this war that Lebanon would be a part of the settlement. And then yesterday we saw the Pakistani official who announced this ceasefire, who negotiated it, say Lebanon would be included. You saw the Iranians say Lebanon would be included. Since I got up today, all the Israelis have done is destroy Lebanon over and over and over again. The Iranians apparently have announced that they're going to close this. They've closed the Strait of Hormuz because of this and potentially will withdraw from these negotiations. I think the Iranians, well, it stands to be seen if they will, but for their own sake, they should absolutely withdraw from these negotiations if the fire against Lebanon doesn't stop. I don't just say that from a personal, self-interested perspective. I say that because this is a sign that these people are empowered if you don't stand up for your demands. And if the Israelis are doing this to Lebanon now, they will do it to Iran again. And so will the Americans.
Yeah, horrific stuff. And Rania, we're really glad you're safe. And I mean, it's what to say. I don't know, Vijay, if you want to react to that.
I mean, I just want to give Rania a hug because, I mean, this is extremely, affecting. Yeah, I mean, I was just saying before you came on, Rania, that, the Israelis first entered in Operation Litani in 1978. That was the first illegal occupation of the south of Lebanon. It's never ended, I mean, they've had to withdraw in 2000, in 2006 they failed, but since 1978, I mean, I don't want to out anybody's age, but I have a feeling that this occupation of Lebanon is older than the two of you. and or close to, yeah, it's definitely not older than me. But it is outrageous. It dwarfs what happened in Sabra and Shatila. Sabra and Shatila become a nothing compared to this. And I think you are absolutely right. I think the Iranians were correct to put it on the 10-point plan, that any negotiation for a comprehensive peace, especially now with Iran having the strategic upper hand, has to include the entirety of West Asia. It has to include Lebanon. It has to include the Palestinians and so on. And the Israelis are just not going to accept this. It's going to take a long time. The United States is coming to an acceptance of this, I think, Rania, because of a strategic loss against Iran. They don't know what to do next. Yeah, I mean, Trump's tweet suggested that the escalation ladder goes to nuclear. There's nothing else. And if 100 million Iranians are there, and 100,000 of them say that, look, I'd rather die than surrender, well, that's what it might take, for the United States. And you use the right word, bloodlust. A bloodlust. They want a piece of flesh. They want to kill people. But you can't kill everybody. What's the population of Lebanon? 5 million. What's the number of displaced? Was yesterday 1 million. Yeah, 1 out of 5 people. By the end of today, what do you think? 1.5 million displaced, maybe higher. Who knows? Yeah, it doesn't matter. Are the Israelis going to kill 5 million Lebanese? Are they going to kill 100 million Iranians? Are they going to kill all the Palestinians? They couldn't kill 2.3 million Palestinians. Okay, they couldn't do it. You can't do it. You have to live with people. And that's the message that's not getting through to the Israeli population. You're going to have to live with the Lebanese. You're going to have to live with the Palestinians. The Iranians are there. Yeah. I think the message, Rania, is getting through in the Gulf Arab states, in the Gulf Coordination Council. You're going to have to live with Iran. Iran is now going to dictate the terms to the Emiratis. It is going to dictate the terms to Kuwait. It's going to dictate the terms to Bahrain. It's going to dictate the terms to Qatar. You're going to have to deal with it. Okay. Oman and Iran own the Strait of Hormuz. For the first time in their history, they are claiming it. That's done. Yeah, that's a strategic victory.
Yes.
Well, Israeli population and the population of the United States is going to have to come to terms with the fact that Iran is a 2,000-year civilization, 100 million people. They ain't going anywhere. The Lebanese, the United States has tried. What was the first intervention? It was called Operation Blue Dart, I think, or Blue something. Yeah, 14,000, 15,000 US Marines, 1970s again. The United States has intervened. The Israelis have intervened. The Lebanese, they're not going anywhere. They're not going anywhere. In fact, instead of going further to the right, I would say they're getting strengthened in their sense of resistance and a Lebanese identity. And I think this is indeed, just kill as many people before you can't kill anymore, right? That's what we mean. Kill as much,
it's what the Israelis
destroy
do.
as many until you can't. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, we won't know until after the fact, but the hope today, if there is any hope, because people are so desperate for this to be over, there's a real fear that this could be the opening salvo to a new level of escalation here in Lebanon. And if that's the case, that'll be completely devastating for the entire country. It already was devastating. And on the other end of it, we do know that Israel has a pattern of, ahead of any sort of imposed ceasefire, of just acting like maniacs and killing as many people as they can and doing as much damage as they possibly can. So people are waiting to see which one of those, ends up happening. And, I said in the beginning of this war, when Hezbollah got involved, because I was quite critical of that decision to enter this war. But at the same time, I understood, there is, just from like a basic strategic standpoint, there's something that did make sense. It's a huge gamble, but it did make sense that, if you're going to do it now, kind of the thinking is what they had, and do it when there's, Iran to do it with, and you're not doing it on your own, because, Israel was killing people and bombing Lebanon every single day before this new escalation. But it stands to be seen what Iran will do. It really does, because, one of the things I also have warned about is if it becomes a fight that's just between Hezbollah and Israel, Lebanon's in big trouble. Because Hezbollah on their own, they can stop an Israeli occupation, maybe. I mean, Israel's still going to create a dead zone. But on their own, it's just not, they can't stop Israel. Not that Iran could, but with Iran, they were at least distracted. And you had the Iranians and Hezbollah coordinating these sort of hits on the Israelis. But on their own, they're just a non-state actor. They don't, have ballistic missiles to fire the way that Iran can at the Israelis. So it stands to be seen what happens here. But I just want to go back to, I know there's a segment of Iranians in the government who have a view that this could potentially, this 2-week pause, these negotiations could be a cover for the Israelis and Americans to recalibrate, as they have before. So we'll see how serious Trump is, but Trump did come out after lying. He lied. He knew when the Pakistanis said, and the Iranians said, Lebanon would be concluded, he knew that was part of it. And he very cavalierly today, as a throwaway line, just said Lebanon doesn't count. So again, we'll see what happens. But this level of destruction it just keeps spreading. And it's going to continue to spread as long as the Israelis are allowed to act as freely as they want to across the region.
I mean, it's interesting, Rania.
Sorry.
One
thing before one update real quick about those numbers. It seems that the updated numbers from the Ministry of Health in Lebanon is 112 dead, 837 injured. I'm certain that number will rise, but please go ahead, Vijay.
No, I was just going to say that, it's interesting. The mandate holder for Lebanon in the mandate period was France. Last week, Emmanuel Macron made a very strong statement, actually, about the Israeli assault on Lebanon, where he said that this is going to become a new Gaza. He used that phrase, this is going to become a new Gaza. And there was a bit of a back and forth between the French and Israeli government about arms sales, because he said France will not provide weapons to Israel as a consequence of this. It would be interesting to see after today, after the kind of assault on Beirut, the images coming, the videos coming out of Beirut. Of course, you are seeing it with your own eyes, but the videos are outrageous. I mean, they are very affecting. Entire buildings being brought down and so on. I wonder what the Europeans are going to make of this, because, France in particular has still got this sort of mandate consciousness regarding Lebanon. And I do wonder, because that phrase, Lebanon should not become a new Gaza, is a very interesting phrase. It means two things. It suggests a recognition by the French government that Gaza was indeed an atrocity. If you use it as a baseline, something should not become a new Gaza, you are then recognizing on an international stage that Gaza was an atrocity. Well, that's interesting. I would have called Macron out for that and said, if that was the case, why don't you go in today at the International Court of Justice and put France's name down as supporting the South Africa claim against Israel? Join it, because if you're going to use the phrase, we don't want something to be a new Gaza, you're recognizing that, the old Gaza was a victim of genocide. And if you don't want Lebanon to be a new Gaza, why is France not walking into the UN Security Council today and talking about an illegal war? All the Europeans are united on the idea that Russia illegally invaded Ukraine, because Ukraine is a sovereign country of the UN and Russia crossed the frontier. That's true. Russia did violate Article 2 of the UN Charter there. But there is a blue line established by the United Nations in 2000 that divides what is the state of Lebanon with the state of Israel. It's not a border because it's not recognized as a border, but it's a blue line drawn by the United Nations for the Israeli withdrawal from Lebanon. So Lebanon is under attack. Its Article 2 rights under the UN have been violated. It is facing much worse devastation and destruction than Ukraine. Where are the two-faced Europeans? Why aren't they at the UN Security Council banging on about the illegal attack on Lebanon, just as there was an illegal attack on Iran? Article 2 violation of the Charter. I mean, these people should not get away with this. And I want to say bluntly, I would like to see the other permanent members of the Security Council, Russia and China, bring this up much more forcefully in the chamber. There needs to be a resolution today that condemns this violence, and let's see the United States come out by itself and veto it. Let's see that. Let's put a resolution today in the Security Council, force the US to veto a resolution on its illegal war against Iran. Where are they? When civilians are being killed, where are these other powers? Iran is a member of the BRICS bloc. Okay, the BRICS bloc is largely, I've been saying for a while, it's largely a trade bloc. That doesn't mean that the other members of the BRICS don't have a voice. I mean, Iran is being attacked even till today, even though there's a ceasefire, the war is ongoing. It is a violation of Article 2 of the Charter. Where are the BRICS countries? I was happy to see Anwar Ibrahim of Malaysia come out and say that Iran's 10 points are reasonable and should be discussed and debated. Of Western newspapers, the only one that took it seriously to report was The Guardian. Nobody else, they just mention there's a 10-point thing, but they don't go into the details. New York Times, Wall Street Journal, extremely dismissive. But where are the other big countries? The other BRICS states should be out here saying something. And it is actually quite horrific that nobody is saying anything. They're sort of used to the idea, Rania, that Lebanon takes a pummeling. They're used to the idea.
Yeah.
Lebanon is a punching bag for Israel. It just gets pummeled every once in a while. Israel takes out its anger on Lebanon and then goes back home or goes to the beaches of Cyprus to do rest and recreation.
Well, and then you have these media outlets. I just want to say one thing. You've got these media outlets, as I scour the media, repeating Israel's claims that they're hitting. They say they struck 100 different Hezbollah sites. No,
disgusting.
You did not. That is a provable lie. You can prove that's a lie. There are foreign correspondents, not that you can't believe locals, but there are white Western correspondents all around Beirut. And you know what? They're doing a pretty good job reporting. I've been watching their reporting. They're doing a good job. Your correspondents see what Israel's hitting. A warehouse where they roast nuts is not a Hezbollah command center. Neither is a residential building full of people who were just chilling in their houses in the middle of the day. Neither is a shelter housing people who've been internally displaced by Israel. Neither is a cemetery in the Bekaa. They hit in my friend's village. They hit the cemetery where her grandfather is buried and killed 10 people who were having a funeral. That is not Hezbollah. So, give me a break, you guys. Seriously, these media headline writers and the people who go and edit to make everything Hezbollah. Enough. Everyone sees through your lies.
Yeah. I mean,
Sorry, I'm just very angry.
No, as you should be. And I think with that, we will let Vijay go, and Vijay will be very happy to continue this conversation in future weeks. And we're glad that you still defend the UN Charter and remind us that there is a document that states are in theory supposed to respect and abide by. And I think it's important that, at the very least, let us see the US veto a resolution showing their own international law violations. Let's continue to use these institutions for at least an agitational point. But Vijay, Prashad, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And Rania, enormous hug to you. Enormous hug.
Thank you, Vijay. Thank you.
They love you,
I appreciate
Vijay.
that. That means everything. Sorry, real quick, Zoe, I need to update that death toll again because actually, according to there seems to be a bit of a discrepancy. I think because the Ministry of Health is just a bit slower. The civil defense in Lebanon, is saying that 254 killed today, 1,129 injured, and Israel's Channel 12 is saying that one of the Beirut strikes today, there were so many, it's hard to keep count. One of them targeted the personal secretary general the personal secretary and nephew of Hezbollah Secretary General Naim Qassem. So that's just petty. Okay. Yeah. You're just you're picking off the family members of officials you don't like. It's petty and sick society. You got his cousin too. That'll show him. These people are disgusting. They are a disgusting, demonic society that is literally getting high off of spilling Arab blood right now. That's what's happening.
Exactly. I mean, it's atrocious. And I want to bring on our next guest to continue talking about this, and especially how the U.S. is essentially, as you said, giving the green light for all of it to happen. So very happy to welcome to the show Brian Becker. He's the host of the Socialist program and has been at the forefront of organizing a lot of the anti-war efforts, of course, not only now against the war in Iran, but historically for the last couple of decades. So thank you, Brian, and welcome to this special live stream.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Well, I know Rania is going to have a lot of questions for you, but I just wanted to start off and ask you, in the wake, again, of the last 24 hours, we've seen a lot happen. Trump declared genocide on Iran and have to kind of walk back from that. Where does Trump stand right now, internationally and domestically, after really not only the events of the last 24 hours, but what has happened over the past month? And as the U.S. people have seen him order airstrike against schools, against hospitals, and the involvement of the U.S. in what many are reading as an illegal war.
Well, today there will be demonstrations in about 65 cities denouncing Trump as a war criminal, denouncing Netanyahu and the entire Israeli regime as a group of murderers and war criminals, and to demand that the U.S. leave the Middle East, that the U.S. cut all aid to Israel. Israel, as potent as the Israeli military is, it's only as potent as the U.S. capitalist ruling class wants it to be, because it's a dependent regime. Without the U.S., without the U.S. support, without U.S. backing, all of the Israeli crimes committed right now, every day, every minute, every hour in Lebanon, or every day against the people of Gaza or the people of the West Bank or the people of Iran, none of that could happen without the U.S. green light. So the U.S. sees the Israeli regime as an extension of Pentagon power. People in the United States are condemning this. It's not just that majority opinion opposes the war. People are actually seething with anger about it. And what Trump did, promising the end of the Iranian civilization, promising genocide, talking even in a way, Hitler hardly ever talked like that. The Nazis did commit genocide, but they weren't openly bragging about it. They used some sort of diplomatic subterfuge in order to conceal their crimes. Trump, the American president, boasts about his capacity to commit genocide, but in fact, he was trying to find a way to sort of leave the battlefield at the moment, or leave the Iranian battlefield, maybe not the Lebanese battlefield, in a way that he did not have to admit the reality, which was he has been defeated. And the U.S. media, the corporate-owned media, the ruling class media in the U.S. is sort of acknowledging that Trump was defeated, but their basic attitude is this was bad. Not that the U.S. committed all of these crimes against the people of Iran, or the U.S. and Israel committed all of these crimes against the Lebanese people. It was bad because Iran is actually stronger. Mm-hmm. It's bad because the resistance forces in the Middle East, those who are resisting U.S. imperialism and Israeli Zionism, they are in fact stronger, which is true. but it shows the moral sort of, I don't know what the right word is, the lack of any morality, the lack of any ethic or principles on the part of the U.S. media. They are an extension of the war machine. They are an extension of the empire. And all of the reporting, just think about the airman who was rescued, if in fact that's even what happened. We really don't know. All of it's cloaked in secrecy. Thousands of Iranians have been killed. And there was no emotional outpouring from the capitalist corporate-owned media in the United States. But this one pilot who was in fact dropping bombs on the people of Iran, who was daringly rescued by this search and rescue mission, that's been highlighted as if this human life, which of course we care about all human life, but this human life mattered more than the thousands of Iranians, including so many school kids who have been slaughtered by this unprovoked war. I mean, it says so much. It's such a sort of a revelatory moment for how people should understand the system. Trump is an anomaly in one way. He's a freak. He's a narcissist. He's an open, promoter of genocide. But he's not completely disconnected from the attitudes of the rest of the empire. I was looking at clips yesterday where Hillary Clinton talked about, and this was in 2008 when she was running for president, how we have to be prepared to, quote, obliterate Iran. The Democratic Party holds her up as an alternative to Trump. But is she? Well, obviously there are some differences with Trump, but there's a lot that's the same.
That's exactly right.
Brian, I want to ask you about what's your take on the Democrats? And I'm sorry, you might need to remind you about who the Democrats are. They're this party in Washington that's supposedly opposed to the current ruling party, the Republicans. So now that I've refreshed your memory, I find it super interesting that in the midst of this incredibly unpopular war, probably the most unpopular war that's ever been polled in American history, you have this opposition party that, where the hell has their leadership been? And in fact, I saw a few of their more powerful members after the ceasefire was announced last night, basically calling Trump a coward or trying to portray him like some sort of coward. Are you upset he didn't follow through on his genocide? So I'm just curious, what's your take on the absence of any real leadership from the opposition party amidst this horrific, catastrophic situation that, there's maybe a temporary lull, but could still completely demolish the global economy?
Yeah, indeed. Well, I think it's a crucial question for people who are, alarmed about Trump, alarmed about this man who boasts and promotes genocide, who's carrying out a war against immigrant families, carrying out a war against the Black community. I mean, such a retrograde, reactionary, kind of fascist person. So people are looking for an alternative. So normally people think, oh, well, the alternative is the Democrats, because they could potentially be elected and replace a Republican majority that's greenlighting everything Trump is doing. I understand that. But, Rania, when I was 15 years old going to my first anti-war protests during the Vietnam War, we were chanting, hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? Because it was a Democrat who was conducting the carpet bombing of Vietnam. And LBJ was pro-civil rights under the pressure of the civil rights movement. He wasn't a Republican. He wasn't a super conservative, but he was carrying out genocide against the people in Vietnam. Who carried out the genocide against the Koreans in 1950 and 51 and 52? That was Harry Truman, a Democrat. If you look at the history of the Democratic Party and Republican Party, they change places, but they are both in charge of the military-industrial complex and a government that has a permanent war machine, even in so-called peacetime, because peacetime is no longer a reality. There is only wartime for American imperialism. So if you're actually angry, as you should be, about Donald Trump, if you're outraged and you think, okay, the Democrats are an alternative, they are not. The Democratic people, if the independent anti-war movement, the socialist movement, which is growing rapidly, thinks that the Democrats are an alternative, This is a march directly to the cemetery of the left. This is a march to the graveyard of progressive movements. The Democratic Party is angry at Trump right now because his position has actually weakened the U.S. position in the Middle East in relationship to Iran. David Sanger, the premier foreign policy analyst for the New York Times, he's angry right now because he thinks Iran has more control over the Strait of Hormuz, which it does, that it showed that U.S. and Israeli destruction of Iranian targets killed a lot of people, which it did, but actually strengthened the Iranian government. He's angry because part of the 10-point resolution from the Iranians that Trump yesterday said he was the working document included lifting sanctions on Iran. And David Sanger is protesting this will eliminate, quote, leverage that we have had for decades against Iran. So Iran had a people's revolution in 1979, toppled a US-backed monarch, a dictator, and because they committed that crime of taking control of their country, Democrats and Republicans together and sequentially, but together always, have imposed these draconian economic sanctions to hurt Iranians. You can't say you care about Iranians or Cubans or Venezuelans, and impose economic sanctions so people can't eat, so that they can't get medicine. You can't pretend to care about people and support economic sanctions. Economic sanctions are a form of slow motion genocide for the poorest and most vulnerable elements of any society. It's the poor who always die from economic sanctions. Some section of a society will actually profit from them because scarcity gives profit opportunities. The US government, the Democrats, the Republicans, they are the problem. They are not an alternative to each other. They are the problem. So we have to organize this independent movement, which we in the Answer Coalition and other partnering groups are trying to do. Again, the corporate-dominated media is committed, perpetuating a narrative that promotes the idea that there's some kind of variety in American bourgeois politics between the Democrats and Republicans. Yes, on some issues there are, but not on the issue of empire. On the issue of empire, they are one.
Yeah, and I mean, Brian, this, as we stated before, this has been one of the most unpopular wars really in recent history. Despite that, as you mentioned, the Democrats, of course, did not take any significant action. But why was this war so unpopular amongst the American people?
Yeah, and let's just condition that. This is without any American soldiers being sent in large numbers to actually do some bleeding and dying. Like the whole notion of the war is all the bleeding is going to be somewhere else. This whole promise, we don't want boots on the ground, no boots on the ground. It means there's a war that must be waged, but it's not important enough that any American soldier should actually have to shed their blood, be wounded or killed. So it's this kind of like weird thing. We're going to go to war endlessly, but to the American people, you're not going to feel the pain of the war. Because if the ruling class actually had the American people feel the pain of the war, as happened in Vietnam or Korea or Iraq, we wouldn't have demonstrations today of a couple thousand people in different cities. They'd be hundreds of thousands of people. The people of the United States, in general, oppose the wars. That's why the U.S. government is resorting to drone technology, proxy wars, using Israel or using Ukraine to do all the fighting and the dying and the bleeding, so as to shield the American public from what the war actually feels like, because they know the public already opposes the war. So you can kind of keep a distance from their opposition. Right now, the opposition to the war is still passive. But can you imagine if there was a draft? Can you imagine if every family had to say, oh, my 18, 19, 20-year-old son is now going to be sent to Iran or to Lebanon? No, this would explode in America. There'd be like a complete overturning of the political infrastructure, because the anti-war sentiment based on Vietnam and later Iraq is so deeply held. But it's never profoundly tested by actually creating this wall where the American working class and people generally don't have to feel the war. So what we have to do, what the role of the anti-war movement is, one, to sort of highlight the truth about the human suffering of the war so as to break through this sort of terrible U.S. corporate-owned media, which doesn't care at all about Arabs or Iranians, doesn't care at all, and tells the American people, you shouldn't care either. They're all just terrorists, or they're just our enemy, or somebody you should hate or fear. So we have to sort of bring the reality of the war that way, and also to show how the U.S. government that says there's no money, as Trump is now saying, no money for Medicaid or childcare. We can't afford that because we have to spend all of this money, $1 trillion plus a year, on war. Well, who are the wars for? Does one worker in the United States have an investment in the Middle East? No. Does one worker in the United States have an investment in Venezuela? No. Does any worker in the United States have an investment anywhere overseas? No. These are rich men's wars for corporate America, for the capitalist class, and the role of the U.S. media is to convince the people of the United States, the working class in the United States, the 150 million people who go to work every day, who make the country run, that they should not become politically involved. And the way the U.S. government is trying to do it is create these fictions about enemies, fictions about what's at stake, and also to shield the American people from actual direct participation in the awfulness of the war. Rania's in Lebanon right now. Every Lebanese person knows what this war feels like, looks like. Same with the Palestinians, same with the Iranians. And the U.S. government knows this is the human condition. So if you can shield the American working class from the actual outrage of the war, the horrors of the war, they hope that their opposition will remain a passive opposition. Our goal is to make that passive opposition come to life. It's a big job. It's an important job. It's a crucial job. And I would say it's an actual moral and ethical, not just a political obligation of progressive people here in the United States.
Well, since you brought up Lebanon, I wanted to ask you, Brian, given that the day after this ceasefire was announced, this 2-week pause, you had the Israelis almost immediately take their wrath out on Lebanon, on Beirut, just taking down buildings full of people. They're still doing it. Just an hour ago, they took down a massive high-rise building full of people with no warning. Really just a terrifying day across the country, especially across Beirut. I'm just curious your thoughts on this development.
I don't think the Israelis could do this unless Trump said, go ahead. And that's Trump. We know now how the war in Iran came about. Benjamin Netanyahu met in the U.S. war room in the White House with Hegseth and Rubio and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and he had a PowerPoint presentation about why the U.S. and Israel would win the war in Iran. He oversold it. It's obviously false. It's a fiction. It's what Netanyahu always does. And even though there may have been some hesitation, some weak hesitation from some of the voices there, Trump thought, oh, this sounds good. Yeah, we can do this. Yeah, we can win. So Netanyahu knows how to manipulate Trump. It's not that complicated. The man has no real understanding at all of the Middle East, of Iran or Lebanon. And generally speaking, since he took office, Trump has considered the Israelis to be number one ally, not just of the U.S. government in general, but of him personally. And so I think that the Israeli bombing of Lebanon that's going on in defiance of the ceasefire agreements, this is what Iran agreed to, that's because Trump sort of cavalierly says to Netanyahu, go ahead. If you want to do it, do it. I'm not going to stand in your way. And so here again, Trump is completely complicit with the bombing today in Beirut. It's not just Netanyahu. Again, Israel is a small country, completely dependent on U.S. aid. If the U.S. says to Israel, we're stopping all money to you tomorrow unless you stop the bombing of Beirut or you end the settlements in the West Bank or whatever, the Israelis would have to do it. They cannot survive. There are hundreds of millions of Arab people who are hostile to the Zionist expansionist fantasy. and Israel's endless war, America is the guarantor of all things in Israel. Why would the U.S. do it? Because of the love of Jews? Really? The hatred of anti-Semitism? Really? No, it's because Israel is an extension of American power in a resource-rich region of the world where 2/3 of the world's known oil is. And so Israel is an attack dog on a fairly short leash. And the idea that Israel is some great independent superpower that can do whatever it wants, that's a fiction. So this bombing today in Lebanon, Rania, this is Trump's bombing. And by the way, it's the Democrats bombing too, because what are they saying? I've been watching the media. I don't see Hakeem Jeffries or Schumer racing to the microphone and condemning Trump and Netanyahu for the bombing of Beirut. No, they're completely silent. Why? Because they actually support it. They actually support all of Israel's crimes. They just sometimes are embarrassed, but normally, mainly, they support all of this.
That's exactly right, Brian. And there's, as you mentioned, there's over 60 cities that are mobilizing tonight across the United States in opposition to the continuation, of course, of the attacks on Lebanon, and again, declaring that Trump is a war criminal. So we'll definitely be following those actions on Breakthrough News, and make sure you're following the Socialist program, where Brian Becker brings great analysis on a weekly basis, and the Answer Coalition, which will be surely covering the protests tonight that we're seeing across the country. So thank you so much, Brian, again, for joining us for this crucial analysis.
Thank you.
Well, Rania, I don't know if there's another update that you want to give. I know it's a very difficult moment right now, and I'm sure you're trying to kind of keep track of your friends and your family. What's on your mind?
Well, for those who are just tuning in, so today was a horrendous day across Lebanon, and particularly Beirut, where the Israelis unleashed a massive escalation all across the city, bombing so many areas it's hard to keep count, demolishing entire high-rise buildings with people inside of them, without any warning whatsoever. And they did this they bragged about this after they did this first round of strikes. They said they used 50 of their warplanes. That might be their entire Air Force for a tiny country like Lebanon. Think about that. 50 Israeli planes dropped 160 bombs in 100 different locations in Lebanon in the course of 10 minutes. That's what happened this afternoon in Lebanon. And so far, this number is expected to rise, but the Lebanese Ministry of Health says that so far 112 people have been killed, another 837 injured. This also included strikes across the south and across the Bekaa. In the Bekaa, I mentioned earlier that they actually bombed a funeral. They bombed a cemetery where there was a funeral taking place, I believe. They killed some 10 people there, I think. I'm sorry, my numbers might not be up to date because it's really, really hard to keep track. There was just so much wanton destruction today by the Israelis. And this comes after the announcement of the 2-week ceasefire between the Iranians and the Israelis and Americans, which Trump announced last night after threatening to genocide all of Iran, right? And so in this ceasefire announcement, which was announced by the Pakistanis specifically said that Lebanon was included in the ceasefire. And the Pakistanis are pretty serious people. And the Iranians were under the impression Lebanon was included in the ceasefire because the Iranians insisted on that. So it stands to be believed at this point that Trump okayed that. Well, a few hours later, the Israelis committed a few more massacres in the south. And then Netanyahu came out this morning and said Lebanon is not a part of the ceasefire, that the Israelis will abide by the ceasefire with Iran, but not with Lebanon. And they went on to unleash this massive, unprecedented escalation that terrified the entire country today, specifically those situated in Beirut, me being one of them. It was a really, really, really scary day. I spent the day waiting to waiting and hoping that my building wasn't targeted, that buildings around me weren't targeted, wondering if this apartment I'm sitting in is going to become like a tomb, watching the images coming out of areas of Beirut I know well, that I spend time in, that are not far from me. There was an area about 500 meters away from me that was hit today. That was really, really scary. I actually ended up leaving Beirut because I couldn't stomach it. I think, a lot of people wouldn't be able to, because it was really, really terrifying. And after I left, there was something else that was not far from me that was struck. An entire building was taken down. The Israelis say they hit 100 different Hezbollah sites across Beirut. That is a lie. The Israelis were killing civilians, as they do. They hit a shelter full of displaced people. They hit a warehouse where a very well-known famous nut factory roasts its nuts. They hit a pretty nice building that's a high-rise near a very well-known fancy mall. These are areas that have otherwise been largely untouched by Israel's wrath, because there had been some sort of rules mostly before this, where certain areas were considered relatively safe. The Israelis are saying no longer. They actually released a little GIF. Their spokespeople released these little GIFs showing a map of the southern suburbs of Beirut, which they have been destroying, and they issued a warning for this morning, and they issued evacuation orders for the beginning of this war, and a lot of people have left the southern suburbs. It's where hundreds of thousands of Lebanese Shia live. It's considered, as the Israelis call it, a Hezbollah stronghold, but it's just a bunch of neighborhoods with apartment buildings where some people do support Hezbollah and other people don't. All that's to say, the Israelis are now saying that Hezbollah has now moved to the rest of Beirut and is hiding among civilians, is using us as human shields. This is the Gaza playbook, right? And so it's a really frightening escalation. And it's, Trump came out, everybody was kind of maybe thinking maybe Trump will angrily call up Netanyahu and say, you're trying to sabotage the ceasefire, stop doing this. But instead, Trump gave an interview to someone from PBS and said Lebanon's not a part of the ceasefire. So he agrees, as Brian explained, he has given he's given Netanyahu the green light to use our tax dollars, to use weapons paid for by our tax dollars to bomb civilians in Lebanon. And so now we're waiting to see what the Iranian response will be. The Iranians have so far stated that I think they've maybe closed off the Strait of Hormuz and are threatening to reciprocate with some sort of response against the Israelis if they continue. But, it stands to be seen whether that will happen. There are different arguments about why Iran might, stand by its ally in Lebanon. In fact, it's in their own interest to do that, considering that past ceasefires have been used for the Israelis and Americans to regroup. And if Iran lets Lebanon get demolished, it's basically allowing the Israelis to feel empowered and the Americans to feel empowered to look at Iran as weak and to eventually come after Iran with war again. And the entire notion here was for this war to end all wars across the region, which is why Iran insisted on a ceasefire, also including its allies across the region. The other issue as well is that since October 7th, a lot of these Israeli campaigns against Iran's allies in other parts of the region have spilled over into Iran. Whether it's, Israel hitting the Iranian consulate in Syria, or the Israelis killing Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, or the 12-day war last year. So, there's the thinking is, okay, if you allow this to go unchecked in Lebanon, then this will eventually spill back over into Iran. And what was the whole point of this if it wasn't to end this from ever happening again? So again, we'll see how Iran responds. In the meantime, Lebanon, just a completely devastating, horrific day. Me and all my friends, very scared, just not knowing what's going to come next. And, sorry if I'm a little out of it. It's just been very high adrenaline in the worst way possible. So yeah, that's my Lebanon update.
Well, Rania, the most important thing is that you're safe, which we're very happy about. And again, thank you for joining and being able to give this really important report, because again, you were on the ground. You literally just left Beirut, which is being bombarded by Israel. And I do want to reiterate the point that Brian made. This most likely happen with complete approval from U.S. President Donald Trump. Israel is not able to carry out the crimes that it carries out without U.S. Backing and aid. So that needs to be front of mind as we're seeing these attacks on Lebanon. It is not separated from the United States. It is not separate from the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran. It's very much a part of it, and the U.S. is very much an active actor in these crimes. So it will be, I think that the protests that we'll see across the United States tonight, I'm sure will have very strong messaging against what's happening in Lebanon, and the pressure, I think, will continue to be put on some of these pretty useless U.S. lawmakers from both parties to maybe just step up and remind their executive that actually the U.S. does have to or should respect international law at the bare minimum. But I do want to remind people, if you haven't already, Rania's in tough spirits, so I'm going to say it for her. Smash the like button. Come on, guys. She literally just escaped a war zone. If you haven't smashed the like button before, now is the time to do so. And subscribe to Breakthrough News on YouTube. Become a member, support our work materially. Go to patreon.com/breakthrough news. Now more than ever, it is of crucial importance to be supporting independent media. As Rania said, these mainstream media outlets are essentially playing cover for war criminals. They are playing cover for Netanyahu. They're playing cover for U.S. President Donald Trump. They're trying to justify massacres. That is the kind of news that you're going to be getting from these mainstream outlets. To actually know the truth, you really must support independent media, which is going to read through and break down these lies that are spread by mainstream media that, again, just want to peddle war and destruction of people across the globe. So continue to support Breakthrough News and other independent media outlets. Rania, I don't know if there's anything we want to get to before pulling up the interview that you conducted this morning with someone located in Iran, Navid Zarrinal, before you unfortunately had to cut the interview short due to the bombing happening against the city you're in.
Yeah, so it's crazy. I was, Navid is in Tehran. You're about to see this interview. I was recording with him, and you're not going to see it in the interview because we cut it out, but like the interview kept getting interrupted because my phone kept ringing. And going off, and I had to tell him, hang on a second, like this person, because there's people that I don't usually like, they'll message me, they don't usually call me. And because I was doing the interview, I didn't know what was happening. That's during this interview was when the Israelis did their 100 strikes in 10 minutes. And so I was just inundated with messages of this area was hit, this area, and I'm just like, what's going on? And so I'm trying to keep my cool. So sorry if during this interview I seem a little like distracted. And then at one point, a friend of mine called me who's in the States to ask me, where are you right now? And I was like, well, I'm in Beirut. Why? And she was like, okay, are you safe? Like, and I'm like, yes, what's going on? And she tells me that, in central Beirut, her relative's building was hit. And I was like, what? And it was in an area that was shocking to hear was hit. And so then I started like getting more messages. And eventually I had to tell Navid, look, I have so many more questions for you, but I'm really sorry. I got to go figure out what the hell's happening around me. And so I apologize for this interview not being maybe as comprehensive as I would have liked it to be. But regardless, Navid is a well of information. And so, keep the caveats in mind as you watch this. Hello, everyone. I'm Rania Khalek, and this is Breakthrough News. And joining me from Tehran is Navid Zarrinal, once again, an Iranian American academic and host of the Colony Archive. Navid, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me, Rania.
And I also should mention before we get started that you have been doing live updates on your Instagram account, which I encourage everybody to go follow. Very, very important live updates at Navid. How do you pronounce that at the end?
Vahraman. That's my pen name.
Okay, so NAVIDWAHRAMAN. Go follow Navid. We have so much to talk about, so many developments. I'm speaking to you. Basically, we're pre-recording this. It's going to be on the live stream today. So we are recording this in the afternoon, Beirut and Tehran time. I guess first and foremost, after everything that's transpired over the last 24 hours, what is the reaction among ordinary Iranians about this apparent 2-week truce that Donald Trump announced and the Iranians have said is in fact going to happen?
Yes, so I mean, there is no halal champagne yet. I mean, champagne is not a tradition here, so we haven't opened any halal champagne because there is still a level of uncertainty. So I would say that there are two main moods right now. One is one of confidence and feeling victorious because there was always a fear of war, and the Iranians did not know how they would fare under U.S.-Israeli attacks. But now that they were able to hold them off and even in a way do kind of a reverse sanctions on them and basically put a lot of pressure on the global economy and on the price of oil, and also militarily, they were able to asymmetrically fight the Americans and the Israelis and basically all their other allies. They have a lot of confidence, especially because Trump came to the negotiating table from a position of weakness. And if you actually see the details of the ceasefire, it's really incredible because the Americans didn't really make any major demands as they always do. Rather, it was the Iranians, and the Iranians were saying that we have a 10-point plan that we want to talk about in Islamabad. I try not to use the word negotiation anymore because it's been so poisoned, and the Americans have shown so much flakiness and a lack of trust when it comes to negotiation. So let's just talk about talks. But the Iranians basically want to talk to the Americans through a 10-point plan, and they have a lot of demands, some of which are actually for Israel to cease fire in Lebanon, and also for the complete withdrawal of U.S. combat forces from the Middle East in order to bring a more secure future to the Middle East, or I think the soon-to-be new name would be West Asia. So I recommend that people say West Asia because it's from the perspective of people who live in Lebanon and Iran or Palestine, as opposed to the perspective of the Americans. So they want basically they have 10 demands that they want to talk about in Islamabad, and the Americans, the Trump administration, agreed to entertain the 10 demands and talk about it. But again, because there is a major lack of trust in the Americans, there's also this mood of uncertainty about what will happen after the 2 weeks. And also the question of maybe Iran should have fought a bit longer in order to have a stronger hand when it comes to a ceasefire or potentially a permanent ceasefire, because fighting longer would have probably put more pressure on the Americans and the Israelis.
Yeah, I mean, look, as I'm speaking to you, the Israelis are going totally nuts in Lebanon. They have done several strikes, all simultaneously across different areas of Lebanon. And we're going to talk a bit about the Lebanon front here because obviously, I want to talk about the 10 points you're referring to. The Iranians have released this 10-point plan. That's really what they've been asking for throughout this war, but it's evolved over time. So I'm just going to read some of the demands in this 10-point plan. Again, this is what the Iranians have been putting out for a while, but now Trump has, I think, kind of cried uncle and agreed to it. It demands a guarantee that Iran will not be attacked again, permanent end to the war, not just a ceasefire, end to Israeli strikes in Lebanon, lifting of all U.S. sanctions on Iran, end to all regional fighting against Iranian allies. In return, Iran would open the Strait of Hormuz. Iran would impose a Hormuz fee of $2 million per ship, would split these fees with Oman. Iran would provide rules for safe passage through Hormuz, and Iran would use Hormuz fees for reconstruction instead of reparations. And of course, these are, I guess you could call them maximalist demands, but it seems as though Iran is in quite the position of strength here to certainly get concessions from the Americans if this goes through. But I guess to what you were saying, my question would be, how after, the 2 times now in the midst of negotiations with the U.S. has attacked Iran. So how is this being received by Iranians in the sense of, I imagine there's probably some cautious optimism here, especially because Trump literally threatened genocide yesterday and seems to have reversed course. That being said, is there any trust here for the Americans?
Yes. So I would say no, the level of trust is pretty low. You can see it if you talk to Iranians and if you see what the Iranian officials are saying. The level of trust is pretty low, but then they're also confronted with this, political reality and, the world of international relations where they have to make compromises and they have to basically talk to countries that have proved to be untrustworthy. And let me say one last thing about the demands, though, because you call them maximalist, and it makes sense from the vantage point of the Americans or the Israelis to say it's maximalist. But from the vantage point of the Iranians, I would say it's not maximalist, because all they're really asking for is to be treated like a normal country, to be respected, and also to have security. So, I mean, security and basically trade, things that many countries in the world have, they're asking for. And so for the past 47 years, because they had an anti-imperialist and anti-Zionist revolution, they have been subject to this injustice where, they cannot trade, they cannot use the world banking system, their monies get frozen. Turkey actually charges a fee for transit of ships in its waters, and some other countries do the same. So what they're really asking for, even the $2 million fee per ship, is not a lot, and it would actually feed into the reconstruction of the country. I would say maybe because they also have a demand for reparations, or qaramat, as we call it here, and that might be a little bit maximalist, because the U.S. did not even give its black population or its native population reparations, so let alone Iran. I don't think they would give Iran reparations. But I would say they're pretty reasonable demands, and people like Vali and Nasr, who are U.S. State Department functionaries. They have worked for the U.S. State Department. They call it outlandish, even though I think they understand that in some sense it is fair. But they still call it outlandish, but that's again from the perspective of the Americans. But I think from the perspectives of Iranians, and also even an objective, fair perspective, they're pretty reasonable demands. But again, to answer your second question, the Iranians are being very cautious, and they're also announcing that they have their hand on the trigger, and if U.S. and Israel blow up the talks again, then Iran will certainly go into the warring mode.
No, you're absolutely right. These are very reasonable demands. And I mean, when I use the term maximalist here, maybe it's not the right term. I mean, this is like what Iran is demanding, but I imagine there'll be some negotiations around some of these, depending on how these talks proceed, where there may be wiggle room here or there so that both sides can come to an agreement. That being said, I wanted to ask you very quickly to address something that's still going around. We keep hearing that this is Iran's longest internet shutdown, and the longest internet shutdown in the history of anywhere. It keeps being portrayed that way. But, and obviously there are restrictions on the internet in Iran. I'm not, putting that into question, but, I've talked to you, and I know you've had to, do a couple things to make it possible to use the internet. I've also talked to other commentators and analysts and journalists inside Iran that I've had on Breakthrough News. And so I just wanted you to address, just very briefly, if you could explain what the internet restrictions are in Iran, because clearly you are able to actually use the internet. It might not be as easy as it is for somebody in Washington, D.C. at the moment. There may be some hoops you have to jump through, but I just want to clarify what is meant by internet shutdown.
Sure. So the internet was shut down several years ago as well, when there were economic protests over the increase in the price of fuel. Then during the 12-day war, there was also a temporary shutdown. I don't think it was, for the entire duration of the 12-day war, but for some days it was shut down. And then again, during the January protests turned riots, the internet was shut down. And then when this war started on February 28th, on the same day, they shut down the internet. But when we say a shutdown, it means access to the international internet, because the national internet works. So if you want to get a taxi app, if you want to order food, if you want to stream local music or movie apps, they're all available. But then the international internet is restricted. And the rationale that the Iranian state provides is that because the internet becomes a medium for the opposition, the opposition that was active during the January protests, some of them, were organized by U.S. and Israel. Donald Trump just admitted to it a couple of days ago that the U.S. was giving them guns. They're able to communicate with foreign intelligence through the internet. So that's a way to basically shut down that line of communication. But also there are these Persian language medias, both on satellite, but also through the internet, that are funded by the Zionists and by Western countries in order to create instability in Iran, such as Iran International and even BBC Persian. And so that's also in a way seen as generating psychological warfare on Iranians. And the idea is that if you're being subjected to a war of aggression, you need to raise people's confidence. So it's best for them to actually consume the internal Iranian media. So that's another rationale. I'm not saying it's justified, but that's how the Iranian state sees that. But I think the information war is secondary because the internet was open via VPN before the war. And the information war was happening. But I think the main concern is, the instability that could be generated. The information war is secondary then, because before the war, through VPN, people could access channels like internet media like Iran International and BBC Persian and Radio Farda and many others. So the main concern is foreign intelligence communicating with elements of instability inside the country. And that's the rationale of the Iranian state, cutting it. But what people have, there are configs and VPNs that connect to certain networks. I don't know how they work, but there are VPNs that work and some people have them. And also people who have official credentials or they work with media houses, then they also, in their offices, they have access to the internet in order to be able to communicate with the outside world and tell the Iranian side of things. So essentially the internet is restricted, but it's not fully shut down. But it does put a lot of pressure on people because we all have internet addiction, especially Instagram. It was a very popular app here, and now many people are not able to access it. I would say most people are not able to access it. And also people were actually selling and doing business on Instagram. They were running pages on there. But what they're doing is that as they're getting accustomed to the internet restrictions, for the sake of the country's security in a state of emergency, they are shifting to local Iranian apps in order to do their businesses.
Can you talk to me about the conversation in Iran about the inclusion of Lebanon in the ceasefire? We were initially told by the Pakistani prime minister and the announcement that Lebanon was folded into the ceasefire that would be in place for the next 2 weeks while negotiations take place. Several hours later, Netanyahu came out and said, no, we're not abiding by a ceasefire on Lebanon, just with Iran, and the Israelis started striking. So what do you make of this part of the potential settlement? We've heard the Iranian leaders repeatedly say that Lebanon would be folded into a settlement. Where do you see this going? Do you think this is a way for Israel to maybe sabotage negotiations, or do you think that the Iranians would be kind of willing to let Lebanon go for a broader settlement?
Yes, so good question. And I would say the approach of the Iranians is different than the Americans. You all know the famous Henry Kissinger quote that it is dangerous to be an enemy of the US, but it is deadly to be a friend of the US. So basically, even if you're a friend of the US, you might be abandoned or you might be left to your own devices. And this is actually what happens with the Arab states of the Persian Gulf, is that the US is not really interested in protecting them. They're more interested in Israel's maximum security. And then when it comes to the Arab Gulf states, I mean, Trump might be cool with receiving a jet from them or having some business deals with them that would benefit him and his family. But ultimately, they're not really, they're not fully human subjects for the Americans, and not just the Trump administration. I think for every American administration, it has been more about the military and economic cooperation. But if it comes to Israel's security or Israel's demands, then they're willing to ditch the Arab states. So in that sense, being a friend to the U.S. Can be deadly. Whereas for the Iranians, because they're not as transactional in their outlook, and I mean, of course, they have realist political objectives, and as any other states would do. But then when it comes to the broader political culture, it's not as transactional, and there's a sense of honor, and there's a sense of, what in Persian we call ma'rifat, which is basically this duty that you have to people that you're close with or you're friends with. So for that reason, Iran is not attempting to abandon Lebanon, and they even stated explicitly that part of any ceasefire deal would be the inclusion of Lebanon and for Israel to stop bombing Lebanon as it has been for the past few decades. So they are demanding it. I don't know how practical it is, because even when it comes to Iran's security, even though they have a lot of cards in their hand, with the passage of time, it is possible that US and Israel would still attack Iran. And even if they give them security guarantees, if there's not some sort of economic partnership, which is unlikely at this point, they might attack Iran again. And so same with Lebanon. So even if, in verbally or in writing, they give some assurances that they will not attack Lebanon, I don't think it will happen. And even if the US does, then Israel is kind of, its own creature, despite, all the support it receives from the US, and that it might attack Lebanon again. But my hope is that there would be a permanent ceasefire that would prevent future insecurity for both Lebanon and Iran.
Okay, and there's so many more questions I want to ask you, Navid, but given the situation around me, I actually think I need to go and just make sure that it's getting a little bit closer. So we're going to have to finish this later. I appreciate you responding to the questions I did ask you, and we'll see how it goes, and we'll come back to it. Thank you so much for joining me. So yeah, sorry. I don't know if you could tell, I was getting increasingly uncomfortable. I'm glad I got to watch the interview, because while I was talking to him, I actually wasn't even able to really hear what he was saying because I was just freaking out. So yes, today was an incredibly scary day. And there's a few things that I want to add about the situation in Lebanon before today, or actually during today. So Lebanon has this odd situation it's in, where it has this government, this Prime Minister Nawaf Salem and the President Joseph Aoun, who kind of rode in on the backs of Hezbollah's defeat, I would say, in the 2024 war with Israel. That definitely weakened Hezbollah, that war. I mean, Hezbollah lost its entire senior leadership. You had the pager attacks. They suffered a massive blow. Some people might even say that in this latest escalation, it was like witnessing Hezbollah come back from the dead. Not that it was like completely unable to put up any fight, but nobody imagined it was able to do what it's doing right now against the Israelis, whether it's through its firepower in terms of being able to fire at Israel, or whether it's through the battlefield. I don't want to call it a victory, because it's not, but they've been able to prevent this Israeli invasion, the 7th invasion of Lebanon since 1978. And there's been fierce battles in the south, and Israel has suffered casualties, including in recent days. Israeli media has been talking about it as, something that was leading to a potential defeat, and how they're suffering so much, and how they were even shifting the goalposts. The Israeli military, they went into this escalation saying that they wanted to disarm Hezbollah by force. And the Israeli military started shifting the goalposts and saying that's actually not anything that's possible in the short term. And it's something that we're going to need like the Lebanese government to do. So that's all to point out that in 2024, after the ceasefire in November of that year, Hezbollah was seen as weakened. A new prime minister was brought to power. This guy, Nawaf Salem, who sat on the International Court of Justice during the genocide proceedings against Israel over Gaza. Some people might remember the Israelis called him Hezbollah's justice, which is hilarious because he hates Hezbollah, as we've seen during this episode. And we have Joseph Aoun, the president. And in the 15 months before this latest escalation after the ceasefire, the Israelis had violated the ceasefire over 15,000 times, regularly bombing the country. And all Nawaf Salem and Joseph Aoun could do was try to please the Americans by working with them through a mechanism the Americans oversaw to disarm Hezbollah south of the Litani, which is what was taking place, done by the Lebanese army. After this escalation started, Nawaf Salem, Joseph Aoun, they came together and basically
labeled banned Hezbollah's military wing and said they're not allowed to fight the Israelis. And a lot of the country was very upset about Hezbollah entering this war. But then as the war got worse and the Israelis actually invaded Lebanon, and then you had Israelis, the defense minister, talking about, they depopulated the entire south of Shias. They're going to go after the Shias in any village in the south to make sure the Christians and Druze in their villages are threatened from even harboring them in their attics. No Shia and Franks allowed in Christian and Druze attics to take refuge. And that those 600,000 Shia Lebanese who were forcibly displaced by the Israelis from the south of Lebanon would never be allowed to return. Basically doing the Shia Nakba in Lebanon, right? Emptying out the southern suburbs of Beirut, bombing those regularly. At one point, the Israelis even, it was kind of shocking. It seems like it happened forever ago, but it was not that many days ago. The Israelis bombed a Christian area of Beirut nestled in the mountains and killed a Lebanese Forces politician. Lebanese Forces is a right-wing Christian party that has historically collaborated with Israel. And so it was shocking. The Israelis basically killed one of their allies, claiming that his building was harboring a Hezbollah operative who they meant to assassinate. But there was an investigation by the Lebanese army that there was no Hezbollah operative or even any displaced people in that building. And it was a building full of people, in a village full of people who are actually hostile to displaced Shias, and especially Hezbollah, politically speaking. So the Israelis were basically desperately trying to start a sectarian war in Lebanon while also pushing the government of Lebanon under Nawaf Salem and Joseph Aoun to disarm Hezbollah in the middle of a war, while refusing to confront the Israelis themselves, because the Lebanese army is actually not allowed to confront the Israelis because they're armed by the Americans and they don't have the weapons to confront the Israelis. So all this time, all you hear from Nawaf Salem over and over again, let's negotiate peace with Israel, no conditions to get them to ceasefire. And, Israel gave him the middle finger. They were like, you know what? No, we don't even need to do that. We've always wanted peace with Lebanon. And by peace, they mean normalization and recognition. We don't even want that. We want to take the South. Mm-hmm. And so today, after the Iranians announced Lebanon would be a part of the ceasefire, so did the Pakistanis, the Lebanese prime minister, before this massive escalation on Beirut, actually said that the only people who are allowed to negotiate on behalf of Lebanon for a ceasefire is the Lebanese government, basically saying the inclusion of Lebanon in a ceasefire by the Iranians doesn't count. Just completely insane, a complete dereliction of any duty to care whatsoever for so much of your country. Just absolutely despicable and disgusting. So I just wanted to point that out, that even in the midst of this, by the way, since this war started, the president hasn't once given an address to the country. Imagine there's an invasion and an attempted occupation and literally mass displacement across your country in a war of aggression, and the president doesn't even give a speech to address the people. Just absolutely insane. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I also want to point out in more relevant news than the Lebanese government, because they just are completely irrelevant. Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister of Iran, has chimed in about Israel's massacres in Lebanon. He says on Twitter, the Iran-U.S. ceasefire terms are clear and explicit. The U.S. must choose ceasefire or continued war via Israel. It cannot have both. The world sees the massacres in Lebanon. The ball is in the U.S. court, and the world is watching whether it will act on its commitments. So, and then he used a screenshot of the Pakistani prime minister's tweet announcing the effective immediately ceasefire, saying, highlighting the parts including Lebanon. So I think that's Iran basically saying that if the Americans don't stop their evil, demonic child, Netanyahu and the Israelis, then the ceasefire is a no-go. So we'll see how this plays out. But Israel is certainly testing the ability to sabotage the ceasefire, and Donald Trump is absolutely greenlighting this, and saying it's okay to do this to Lebanon with your tax dollars. My tax, our tax dollars are being used to bomb my family's country and destroy the lives of the people around me. All for what? For a declining, decrepit empire run by a bunch of maniacs who threaten genocide? Okay.
Yeah, interesting that the Iranian foreign minister seems to have more concern for the Lebanese people than any of the leaders.
Right? Like, that's actually what I was thinking when I saw that tweet. I'm sitting here thinking Iran's supposed to be this evil country that we're supposed to destroy. And like, and even Lebanon, that's the narrative from the government. They literally tried to kick out the Iranian ambassador from Lebanon a couple weeks ago. Meanwhile, Iran's literally sitting here trying to put Lebanon under the Iranian umbrella of ceasefire. And they're saying, no, thank you.
Literally.
Like,
I mean, even with regards... Even with regard to the people in the United States who are not under attack, the Iranian leaders have been extremely precise in always pointing out that they know that the people of the United States, A, do not support this war, and B, are run by a bunch of psychopathic maniacs they recognize that the people in the United States don't have access to healthcare, don't have access to education. And they're pointing out this very obvious contradiction that the US would rather wage war and use billions and trillions really on this machine of genocide against people across the global south specifically, instead of actually taking care of the people. And obviously there was a lot of references in messaging about the war to the Epstein files and how this was being used by the Trump administration to cover it up. But I think really what's interesting is that they're, of course, calling out this major contradiction and not even amid this crazy war, still saying there's a difference between the people of the United States and its government. And even now speaking up for the people of Lebanon, speaking up for the people across West Asia who are essentially every single day under threat of annihilation because Israel is nuclearly armed and backed by the United States. And Iran is essentially the only nation that is standing between the people of West Asia and total annihilation by Israel whenever it wants. So, I mean...
No, absolutely.
And I'm really happy...
That's the objective reality.
It's the objective reality. And I'm really glad that we have another show tomorrow, and we're going to have even more guests to kind of break this down, because, of course, this is going to be a story that develops within every hour. Very glad, Rania, that you are safe right now.
Me too. And me too. What a scary, scary day. And just like this is an army of terrorists.
Of rapists and terrorists, really. So, I think with that, we come to the end of this show, but people should tune in tomorrow because we're going to be back with some more great guests who are going to continue to, analyze the situation and bring you the latest updates. Rania, of course, who's on the ground with contacts across the region and is, living it right now in Lebanon. So we'll be back tomorrow. And everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. Remember to share this episode. Support independent media because we're out here bringing you the analysis, again, that you really won't get anywhere else. The anti-war movement in the United States, the impact of this war on West Asia and the entire world, and what does it mean going forward. So we're bringing you all of that and more. So make sure to support. And once again, Rania, glad you're safe, and we'll be with everyone tomorrow.